we're going to be talking about types of roots. We talked about square roots a lot before break, and we use square roots to solve quadratic equations. Today we're going to be talking about different types of roots. So just a couple of points here. The first bullet point says if n, which is the type of root, so if the type of root we're doing is an odd root, we will only have one answer. So like a cube root only has one answer. A fifth root only has one answer, etc. If the type of root is odd, we just get one answer. But if the type of root is even, then we will get two answers. So we talked about square roots a lot before break, and a square root is an even root, because 2 is an even number. Why do we have two answers? What did we do to solve the square root equation? What did we put with our answer? Plus or minus. So that gave us two answers. So an even root equation, like a square root or a fourth root or a sixth root, etc., those will have that plus and minus, which gives us two answers. But an odd root will only have one answer. We're going to be working with fraction exponents today. So these formulas are here. They look a little confusing, though. So what I think of when I'm trying to remember how a fraction exponent works is that the top is a power and the bottom is a root. So when you have a fraction exponent, the top of it gives us a power. The denominator or the bottom of the fraction tells us what kind of a root it is. So a fraction exponent is both a power and a root. Top is power, bottom is root. So to evaluate this then, two powers and roots instead of a fraction exponent. Now, you could type this into your calculator, but I'm going to ask that you don't, because starting tomorrow we will have variables in the question, and you can't type those into your calculator. So it would serve you well to learn how to do it with numbers so that tomorrow when we start throwing x's in there, you've had some experience of what's going on. But if you want to check your answers with your calculator, that is more than okay. But I would like you to go through the process with the numbers without your calculator so that you're more comfortable with what we'll be doing tomorrow. So what we're going to do is write this as a power and a root. The top is the power, so that's 9 to the power of 3. The bottom is a root, so that 2 tells us that we're taking a square root. The top is the power, the bottom is the root. So that 3 in the top of the fraction gives us a third power. The bottom gives us a root, so it's a second root or a square root. These first. So we could do 9 cubed, but I don't know what 9 cubed is, so I'm going to do the square root instead. What's the square root of 9? 3, and I haven't done that power yet. What's 3 cubed? 27. 3 times 3 times 3 is 27, and that's our answer. And that's the same thing you would get by typing it into your calculator as long as you're careful. When you type these into your calculator, you need to make sure that you type in 9 to the power of, in parentheses, 3 divided by 2. Otherwise, if you don't put those parentheses, your calculator will do 9 to the third and then divided by 2, which is not what we want to do. Okay? So make sure that you're careful with typing it in. Or since it's a nice one, you could do 9 to the power of 1.5, but if it wasn't a nice decimal, you couldn't do that.
Like if it was 4 over 3, what would be the 3 square root?
The third root, or the cubed root. So that's asking what number times itself 3 times. We'll do more examples that aren't square roots. The next example has a negative exponent. We talked about negative exponents a while ago. What do negative exponents do?
It's a fraction.
Turns it into a fraction. So a negative exponent turns this into a fraction as 1 over 32 to the 2/5. And then we can do the fraction exponent the way we did in the last problem. The top is the power, so that's 32 squared. The bottom is a root, so this is a fifth root. The negative exponent turns it into a fraction, and then that power exponent makes the top be a power, the bottom be a root. A fifth root is asking the question of what number do I multiply by itself 5 times to give me that number? Well, it's going to have to be pretty small, because if I'm only getting 32, going to have to be pretty small. So we can just start guessing, checking. 1 times 1 times 1, that doesn't seem like it's going anywhere. 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 is 32. So the fifth root of 32 is 2. And we haven't done anything with that squared yet. 2 squared is 4. So our answer is 1/4. Yes?
Can we type the root into our calculator?
You can type roots into your calculator. It's in the math menu. The way you would need to type it into your calculator, if you don't want to guess and check your roots, you type in the type of root that it is. So I would type in the number 5. And then you go into the math menu. So try to make this look like calculator button pushes. So you would type the 5, then you press the button that says math, and in that there's a button that says X root. I think it just says X root. It might have something under the root, but I think it just says X root. Parentheses? Is that what it says?
Is this to check it, you said?
To evaluate roots. So if you don't know what the fifth root of 32 is and you don't want to guess and check it, you could type this in. And then you would type in the number that you're trying to take the root of and hit enter. And it would give you the answer of 2 in this case. So your calculator can evaluate roots for you. Go ahead and try example number 3. Power and a root. Which part of it is the power? 16 to the power of 5, which makes the 2 be our root. It's a square root. What is the square root of 16?
4.
4. 4 to the power of 5. I don't know. Calculator. I don't expect you to know what 5 is, but we can type that into our calculator and get 1024. Yes.
If you're just taking this for what's square root of 2?
You do not need to write that 2 there for a square root. The 2 is just kind of understood. If there's no number there, it means it's a square root. I'm writing the 2 just to kind of emphasize that that's where the 2 is going. Because if I didn't write that, students would see the 16 and the 5 and wonder what happened to the 2. But you don't have to write it. No, that just tells us what kind of a root it is. So if it's a square root, we're asking what number times itself twice. But if it were a cube root, then we do need to put that little 3 there, and that's asking us what number times itself 3 times would give us that number. Go ahead and try example number 4. Is that negative in the exponent too? Makes into a fraction. So this is 1 over 64 to the 2/3. Then what happens with that 2/3?
It's the third root of 64.
The third root of 64 squared. The top is the power, the bottom's the root. Third root means what number times itself 3 times is 64? And that's 4. And I haven't done anything with the squared yet. 4 squared is 16. So we get 1 over 16 as our answer. In some of your homework questions, as a heads up, there will be a negative in front of the question. So it'll say something like negative 64 to the negative 2/3. That negative in the front of the problem just hangs out every step along the way to make your answer negative. It doesn't change anything about your evaluating it. It just hangs out and makes the whole thing negative. So when you have a negative in front of the original problem, don't let it confuse you or overwhelm you. Just make a negative in front of every step of your work. Okay? The next example asks us to estimate on the calculator. This is the only time that a decimal is an appropriate answer, is if the directions say estimate on the calculator or just estimate. Otherwise, you need exact answers, which will be fractions or roots. Okay? Decimals are only okay if it says estimate.
What decimal place do you want us to round to?
2, I think the book says. I think the book says 2 decimal places. Now, there are 2 different ways to do this. One way is to use the root function on the calculator to take a 4th root and then cube it. What I want to emphasize to you is moving back and forth between roots and fraction exponents. So the way that I would like you to think about evaluating this is to turn this into a fraction exponent. So that 5, kind of thinking backwards from the last problem, what are we going to do with that third power and fourth root? This is going to become 5 to the power of 3/4. The top is the power, the bottom is the root. And we can type this into the calculator by writing 5 to the power of, and then make sure you put that power in parentheses. 3/4 is the power, not just the 3. And hit enter. And it gives us, I think, 3.344. I think the book says 2 decimal places.
If we were to, like, say we didn't want to put parentheses, could we just put, like, 5 to the caret sign, 0.75?
Yes. If it's a nice fraction, you could do something like 5 to the 0.75. But if it was like 5 to the 1/3, then you can't really do that. You have to round it off. That would give an error. Next problem. Next problem, we're looking at equations. Want to solve this equation for x. What's the first thing I should do to get x alone? Divide by 2. Multiplying by 2 on both sides. I'll do that by dividing by 2. So that gives me x to the 4th power is 81. We haven't worked with 4th power equations before, but we worked with quadratics a lot. If it was x squared equals 81, what would I do? Take a square root. So if it's x to the 4th equals 81, what do you think I'm going to do? Take a 4th root. I'm going to take a 4th root of both sides. And that gives me x equals, a 4th root means what times itself 4 times. So times itself, gives me 81. 3. What kind of a root did I take? A 4th root. What kind of a number is 4? Even number. What do I need when I take an even type of root? 2 answers. We need a plus or minus. When you're solving an equation for x, so not the first type of problems that we're just evaluating something, there was no x's, we don't need to worry about it there. But if there's an x in the problem that we are solving for, an even root needs a plus or minus. In this example, what would I do first? Take the cube root of both sides. We work from the outside in when we're solving an equation. So the very most outside thing is a third power. We undo a third power with a third root. So it just gives us x minus 2 over on the left-hand side.
10.
Cubed root of 10. What number times itself 3 times is 10? Okay, 1 times 1 times 1 is 1. 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. 3 times 3 times 3 is 27, and I just missed 10. So it must be that it's not pretty, and since the directions didn't say estimate, we're not going to make a decimal, we're just going to leave it the third root of 10. Do I need a plus or minus? Why not? Because it's an odd root. A third root is an odd number. That 3 is an odd number. Odd roots do not need plus and minus. Only like square roots and 4th roots. Odd roots like cube roots and 5th do not need plus and minus. We're not doing what x is, so how do we add 2 to both sides? You could write this as 2 plus the cubed root of 10, or you could write it as cubed root of 10 plus 2. I don't really care which way you put them, but just don't put them together. Okay? So it is not the cubed root of 12, but it doesn't matter which order they go in.
If it was a even cube root, where would we put this plus and minus on there?
If it was an even root and you needed plus and minuses, that would just look like, oops, not there. Wrong on that last one. It would just be in front of that root. So this one would say like plus or minus, just in front of the root. Yep. If it was an even root and you need a plus or a minus, it just goes. Okay. All right, your homework is from 7.1.